presence of quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. And I'm going to ask my good friend from Augusta, Senator Jones, if he would begin our meeting with prayer. What mic, Senator? 11. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We bow our heads, please. Thank you, Father, for bringing us here together to do the people's business of people of the state of Georgia. Help us to do it in a manner which will actually uplift you and in your spirit, and make sure we do things that are good for everyone. In your name, Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Welcome. We now have more than a quorum, which is good. Let me introduce the agenda for the evening and how we will proceed. As many of you know, we're in a very tight time frame. The members who are here now have other commitments this evening. We need to move through tonight's discussions as expeditiously as we can. There's only one bill on the agenda for tonight. That is SB 221, the substitute. We have a large number of people, and I appreciate you being here physically. I also appreciate those online. We have a large number of people who would like to provide input. I would suggest that we will not be able to accommodate all input this evening verbally. I will tell you that if you will provide us written input, I'll be happy to include that in the record. So with those ground rules, what I'd like to do is ask Senator Williams as the vice chair to assume the chair, and I will assume the opportunity to share SB 221 substitute. So, Senator.
All right, Senator Burns, let's see, substitute 221 LC 4723225S.
That is correct.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I have a substitute for SB 221. As the chairman pointed out, LC 4723225S. And we're going to work through this bill. Some of this bill you have seen before. Some of this bill is new to the committee, and I'll walk you through it and highlight those things. I will acknowledge that we've got some additional fairly straightforward amendments, friendly amendments, and I'm going to ask if we will pass those amendments out to the committee at this time. And as I review the bill, I'll just discuss the bill as it is, and then what the nominal changes are. They're mostly editorial in nature, although there will certainly will change the meaning. So let's begin with section 1.
Thank you.
Section 1 is a straightforward provision that requires a county election superintendent to undertake the election with all duties who would be, as we discussed last time, judicious, intelligent, upright citizens of the United States. You will notice in the original language, it required that individual be in the county associated with the election. Sometimes that is a bit onerous, and so that portion has been removed. Moving on to section 2. Section 2 was from SB 221, the original version. And it is from the original section 1. This is a section which basically codifies what is happening today, where if you have a performance review board, that performance review board on lines 41, 42, and 43, they'll be an employee of the election division, Secretary of State, 2 of whom will be a local election official or members of the County Board of Elections or County Board of Elections and Registration. So that was inserted to codify. Section 3, if any questions along the line, you're welcome to interrupt and we'll talk about those, and you may get to those relatively quickly.
See who's number 11.
No, it's still just on.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. In section 3, this is a new section. And this section is intended to address a concern on local election boards not acting consistently in how they accept registrations and valid individuals. If you'll notice on line 55, the resident of any person of this state who is homeless and without permanent address the address shall be the location of the courthouse or the county in which such person resides. So that provides a physical address for anyone who might not have a traditional physical address. In line 61 through 62, 61 through 71, there's a section there that points out that if a person registers to vote in another state, county, municipality, or legislative district for any type, that person shall automatically be deemed to have changed his or her permanent address. So that as you'll see later in the legislation, we are dealing with some voter challenges, and this basically defines a person. If you register in another state, then you are deemed to have changed your residency. In B, the section there deals with, again, the same type of thing, but if you go to another state and you're no longer eligible to vote in Georgia, if you return to Georgia, then if you'll notice on line 66, that such a person shall submit a new application for registration to vote in the person's original jurisdiction. Just like if I took my vehicle to South Carolina and became a resident of South Carolina, I would change the registration of my vehicle. I get a new tag, I get a new driver's license. If I return to Georgia with that same vehicle, I would in turn re-register that car in Georgia. Line 69 and 70 and 71 codify the fact that ownership or rental of a post office box within a particular jurisdiction shall not constitute sufficient grounds to establish a person's residency within that particular jurisdiction. So what you see here is residency requirements. What is a resident of Georgia? Again, looking at line 76 and following, that's law. That's currently in law. There's no changes there, but I just wanted to highlight it. If a person removes to another state with the intention of making that their permanent residence, then they're considered to be a resident of that state. And then same thing in the county. There's no other, there is one other change to section 4 on lines 128 through 135. I call your attention to that. Again, what we're trying to do here is to ensure that our local election boards determine a voter's qualifications in a consistent manner. So in lines 128, the national change of address program information sponsored by the U.S. Postal Service or any other factor, including but not limited to professionally aggregated commercial or proprietary information that includes but is not limited to the change of address, lease information, insurance change of address, identification, change of address, or any other reasonable, reliable information to be determined in good faith, including a sworn statement by any person with relevant information pertaining to a factor indicating an elector's residency or non-residency. So in that case, we're trying to determine residency.
Okay,
Question.
have a question.
So I want to make sure we're going off the same LC because I have section 3 on page 3.
I'm sorry, you're right.
followed
Section
by
3.
5. There's no section 4 that I see.
All right, thank you very much. Would you, I'll ask Ledge Council to clarify that. Sorry? It's a typo. Thank you. So we're still in section 3. I saw section 5 and I assumed the previous one was 4. So we'll have to change section 5 to 4 and move forward from there. Any questions on section 3 through line 135? Question? This all is related to establishing a residency requirement. If you go all the way back to line 53, the residency of any person shall be held to be that place in which such person's habitation is fixed without any present intention of removing therefrom. We're trying to establish residency. All right, I am on line 136. I note that that is now really section 4. And I'm looking at lines 46, really through the end of the section.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I do have a few questions in the section we're currently in.
Section 3.
I saw in the section, and I'm not gonna name the section, I'm gonna just go by line numbers so I don't confuse myself. And so we talked about page 4, line 93. No person shall be deemed to have gained or lost a residence by reason of such person's presence or absence while enrolled as a college student at any college or university, other institution of learning in this state. However, I do have a question as relates to college students who do attend colleges out of state. My brother went to Tuskegee University in Alabama, and he did not move to Tuskegee, Alabama, but was a college student. But he also had to forward his mail while in college to Tuskegee because he needed some documents. And by law, I couldn't open his mail. That's a crime. So he forwarded his mail. So if the change of address on the NCOA is going to challenge the status of an elector, how does that affect the college student? Because here on line 93, you say they don't lose this privilege by attending an institution in this state. What about those students who do go out of state?
There was no change to that code, Senator. So there was no adjustment. That is what is currently in code.
I got what you're saying, but you're saying that you don't lose your residency in one code section.
If you don't lose your residency if you moved out of state temporarily. And a college student going to another state for educational purposes without the intent of having a permanent residence there does not lose their eligibility.
But if they file a national change of address for the purposes of mail forwarding, and someone challenges their status as a voter, how do they get the information to come back and adjudicate that if they're attending college?
The national change, we'll get to that a little bit later on in the bill, but the national change of address registry is one component of determining eligibility.
I got you. But you're walking with me on this?
Yes.
Okay. I got more questions. I'm just giving you the start of them.
I got you.
Okay.
I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate the senator from Savannah. I aspire to be as well-dressed as the senator from Savannah, so I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to look, if I can, please. We're looking at, we looked at lines 136 through the end of that section. That is now the new section 4. If you look at that, if challenged, and the elector's name appears on the National Change of Address database as maintained by the U.S. Postal Service, having changed a residency to a new jurisdiction. Again, now residency is permanent. It's not temporary. The presence of such elector's name on such base shall constitute sufficient cause to sustain a challenge against the elector, provided, however, that the challenge is based solely upon the name appearing on the database within 45 days of a primary runoff or runoff election. And any challenge then would be postponed, or any challenge based solely upon the elector's name appearing on a database, but who is determined eligible to the residency of definitions provided in the prior paragraphs. So if you have not changed your permanent residency, the fact that your name appears on the change of address registry is not sufficient grounds to be challenged. All right, and in line 160, any challenge of an elector that occurs during a primary or general election is deemed to be a challenge for any runoff. Any other questions on lines 136 through 162? This is
Got a question.
simply a clarification of what constitutes residency and what would be acceptable information for a challenge. And there's more coming.
Okay.
Question?
Senator Kamala.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So Senator Burns, I do have a question. So can you explain to me how someone would challenge the elector, right? So for example, if you decided to go to my brother's Instagram, you would see him posting at restaurants and different things he was at in Tuskegee and a few towns over, because there's actually not a lot in Tuskegee.
That's right.
That's
right.
And so
Social life is limited.
If I could answer some of your questions. You don't have to do a national change of address to go to college. You can go to the post office and you can fill out a temporary change and have your mail temporarily forwarded to you. You can contact the Board of Elections or the Registrar Board and let them know that you're out of town, but you're going to be requesting absentee ballots, and you can go ahead and make that request known, and you would not be removed from the voter roll.
thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I think that's a lot for a college student.
No, sir. If they're smart enough to go to college, they're smart enough to make a phone call.
All right.
We're grateful to have a vice chairman that spent how many years as an election supervisor?
16.
16 years as an election supervisor.
My question is, how do you challenge that elector? How do you challenge them? What's the basis to challenge an elector?
You can challenge an elector for any reason. If you think that elector does not live in that district or in that precinct, you can file a challenge. The board is required to hear that challenge immediately, or they can allow that elector to vote
Provisional ballot.
the provisional ballot, and it can be heard after the election.
Got you. So could the author further explain line 132 and 133 when it says and any other reasonably reliable information?
Right.
Can I get a definition of what reasonably reliable information is?
This would be information from a commercial or proprietary source that has a legitimate basis of providing information. But what they would provide is basically information to confirm the individual's residency. So they would provide change of address, lease information, insurance, change of address information, identification, change of addresses, and any other reasonably reliable information. So what we're trying to do, Senator, is to utilize sources in addition to the national United States Post Office change of address. Okay. So National Change of Address Program. In addition to that, to do exactly what you're suggesting, which is determine the residency of the individual. So the residency of the individual may be in Savannah, Georgia, but their mailing address may be in Tuskegee, Alabama. So that assists the Board of Elections in determining whether or not it's a legitimate challenge or not.
Wait a minute. I have another question.
Mr. Chairman, while I'm enthralled in this back and forth over here, I was curious if the bill presenter has gotten to the end of the presentation so that then we could start handling these questions in order, or are we going to continue to stop during the process and handle these? I think it would be much more efficient if we would let him do his full presentation and then take the questions.
You're right. He had asked if there was a question on a certain section.
Yes.
So we'll move on and finish the presentation.
Let's complete the full bill. There's a lot here, folks, and I want you to have a chance to kind of digest this just a bit. Section lines 36. We'll use line numbers 136 through 162. We've talked about that already, and basically that is the local election board making a decision based upon a challenged elector. And I pointed out that it's not solely based upon the name appearing on that database, but that is just one factor. If I look at lines 163 through 170, that is a legal statement at the recommendation of the legal counsel that provides just the fact that rules of evidence are set forth in Title 24, not governing any challenges, but evidence should be persuasive and reliable. I'm not an attorney, so I really have a challenge trying to recognize the significance of that, but I accept the fact that that is just the legal statement of how the proceedings will be handled when challenges are brought. Section 6, numbered at 7 at 6 and 171 through 195. An interesting section that deals with the protection and security of ballots. It's ballot security. It was section 122 in the old section 2 in the old Senate Bill 122. This is a combination of Senate Bill 221, 122, and 129. But it deals with securing ballot security. I will point out that there's amendment, just one amendment on line 179 to add the chief registrar to the list of individuals that have access to where the ballots are stored. So the access to the secure space where the ballots are located shall be limited to county election superintendent. We would insert chief registrar, members of the county board of elections, the election supervisor, any personnel in the superintendent's office designated. And you see all those who have access to that area, that space. Now that space could be a room, it could be a building, it could be a box, it could be whatever space is necessary to secure ballots. I think the other thing that I would like to point out is in 192, 195, you've got unvoted blank ballots. Unvoted blank ballots. When unvoted blank ballots are transported to and from precincts, the ballots shall be securely stored in sealed containers, which are accompanied by ballot transfer forms signed by at least 2 individuals so as to serve as an integrated chain of custody. So we're protecting the ballots and we're protecting the unvoted ballot forms, the unvoted blank ballots. Section 8, this will generate some discussion, I'm confident.
Section 7.
Section 7, lines 196 through 211. This section relates to the use of paper ballots. There is a small amendment. We don't even need to change that. I'm sorry. We do not need amendment 2, so we're okay. I want to point out the reason for this section. This section provides for the election superintendent. I'm looking on line 206. It allows the election superintendent may, not shall, may arrange to have voting for such candidates or offices for such questions conducted by paper ballots. All right, let me explain. We're going to do a quick amendment. There'll be a quick friendly amendment to that. After the word superintendent, we will insert the phrase with the review and approval of the state election board. All right, now, the intent of this section is to allow a local superintendent, when having to conduct a special election, a runoff election, an election that would likely require very few, likely attract very few voters, let's say a runoff for a county commission seat, instead of having to roll out all the election equipment, instead of having to go through the process of setting up the ballots, they may use a paper ballot. Those paper ballots would be scanned in the same tabulation systems as ballots that were created by the ballot marking devices. So this is intended to provide flexibility to the local election superintendent and to reduce the cost of small elections, those elections that are low turnout or geographically constrained. Note that this does not allow an individual voter to request a paper ballot. So a voter can't come up and say, I want to vote on paper. It would say the superintendent has determined that the election activity is limited and that paper ballots would be appropriate. They would have the same security requirements of the current paper ballots. The only difference is we'll have the same paper ballot. It'll be hand marked versus machine marked, but only where the superintendent petitions the state election board and receives approval to provide that option. We'll come back to section 8, I'm sure. Section, line 206, current section 7. Looking at lines 212 through 219. This again is an election efficiency paragraph. It's oriented around allowing actually the superintendent to reduce the number of voting machines. If you'll notice in 216 through 219, in each precinct in which optical scanning voting systems are used in a statewide general election, the county election superintendent shall provide at least one voting booth or enclosure for each 250 electors therein, or a fraction thereof, who have not previously cast a ballot in the current election. So what we're seeing is that roughly 50% of our elections are handled in early voting. And yet we are rolling out a system that would accommodate virtually 100%. So we're going to provide the same ratio of voting booths and enclosures per 250 people, but we're not going to provide those to people who have already voted. So the objective here is less cost, less challenges for local superintendents, and then to provide them with some flexibility. So if you've already cast your ballot, we won't plan for you to cast that ballot a second time. In lines 220 through, let me back up just a second. That's right. Gotta make sure I'm on my 220 through 279. This is some cleanup language at the request of the Secretary of State's office. If you'll notice, the only change is in lines 269 through 272. And it's just to ensure that when absentee ballot applications are distributed, they must include the statement that this is not a ballot. We have a challenge with people understanding there's between a ballot application and a ballot. This comes at the request of the Secretary of State. Lines 280 through 349, new section 10. This deals with ballot access. This deals with ballot access. And it allows us to verify and maintain oversight of all ballots. And I want to start on line 284 with the amendment, and then we'll move forward. In discussions with election officials and the Secretary of State's office, we would recommend that we change the word shall on line 284 to may. So an election official, a registrar, board of registrars, or an absentee ballot clerk may establish at least one drop box. May. Not required. So we would not require them to have a drop box. I will suggest to you that if they choose not to have a drop box, then lines 340 through 349 come into play. That's a video review of all drop boxes. Let's walk through the section, and some of that will hopefully become a little clearer. You'll notice that, there's a requirement that the drop box be noted as the official absentee ballot drop box. That, as you complete and sign collect the ballots out of the box, you have to provide the ballot transfer on lines 318 and 319 as prescribed by the Secretary of State. In 322 through 325, again, it specifies that transfer form shall serve as an initial chain of custody on each person who takes possession of ballots until each shall sign for those ballots, and the ballot shall be securely stored in sealed containers. And then as you look on lines 329, you verify that the seal on the box has not been broken or otherwise tampered with. And then finally, you include the date and time and signature. Look with me on lines 340 through 349. It's a new section. This is the video recording device requirement. And there's an amendment here. Notwithstanding any state law to the contrary, you would insert the words and the line in line 340, where a drop box is utilized. The Dropbox location shall use a video recording device to monitor and secure each Dropbox regardless of location. Such recording devices shall be placed where the building with adequate lighting faces the persons on the Dropbox. All counties and municipalities using Dropboxes shall provide live web access. All Dropboxes recordings are at no cost to the citizens. All video recordings shall be retained for a period of time of at least 4 years. Or until the conclusion of any contest involving an election on the ballot in the county or municipality, whichever is later, and shall be made available to the Office of Secretary of State at the conclusion of each election voting cycle. In 2020, when we had a large number of absentee ballots and absentee ballot drop boxes, all of those drop boxes by law were required to have video devices. Unfortunately, not all of those video devices worked appropriately. What we're doing here is allowing the local election board to insert a drop box in their office as is prescribed now. They can do that. They may do that. But if they do that, they have to have a video recording associated with it. Section 11, lines 350 through 370. That just gives the election officials 2 additional hours to provide reporting to the Secretary of State. So after the closing of the polls and reporting to the Secretary as follows. So from 10 o'clock to 11:59, that was a request of the Secretary of State. And then I'm moving on to lines 371 through 411. This defines audits and reviews. It indicates who is the winner, means the winner of a contest on line 76. Incorrect outcome means the winner of the contest or answer to a question would be different with the results from a manual recount. So this is all about audits and tabulation audits and risk limiting audits. If you look at line 385, local election superintendent shall conduct. We struck the word pre-certification and added back the word tabulation or risk limiting audit, again, at the request of election officials. Pre-certification is required, but it's also referenced in another section. We struck lines 403 through 411 because the pilot program has been completed. Section 13, lines 412 through 467. You'll notice that lines 432 is retain and preserve. We did not change the seal requirement. The ballots and other documents are under seal unless otherwise directed by a superior court judge in a manner so to prevent such ballots and other documents from being altered, amended, damaged, modified, or mutilated. And again, in line 436, retain and preserve. The most important thing in this section is lines 440 through 443. Upon certification of all matters on the ballot in a particular election, all such documents for such election shall be subject to electronic inspection per code section 21-2-72, provided that such elections documents are high resolution images of no less than 300 pixels per inch. So that essentially provides 100% of ballot images available to the public online. The Secretary of State's office is currently working on a system to provide that capacity. And we're going to support them in that, but we wanted to codify the fact that we want a digital image of every ballot so that every citizen of Georgia, really every citizen who has access to the internet, can look at any election at any time, look at any ballot, provide any form of review that they choose to. I have, per the request of the good senator from Savannah, I have requested from the State Department of Audits and Accounts a financial note on this so that we would know what that costs. It's a storage cost, electronic storage cost. I've asked them for information on both 300 pixels per inch and 600 pixels per inch, so we can double that. I've had discussions with the Secretary of State's office. Our current image resolution is 200 pixels per inch. I understand that the systems can accommodate 300, but they're not certified for that from an election standpoint, but we might be able to provide that from an imaging standpoint. And then you'll notice that the section C deals with municipal elections, whereas section BA, I guess, dealt with general elections and returns, in case of elections other than municipals. So an objective to provide full and complete ballot image access. Full and complete ballot image access. Section 468 through 479, I'm almost done. Now section 14, references 15, again, an attorney's recommendation that we add a line on 47 and 478 and 479. Under no circumstances shall a non-prevailing party be liable for reasonable or actual attorney fees as long as the election contest is brought in good faith. That's a recommendation from the legal review team. In lines 480 through 485. This is a request of legislative counsel. You'll notice the insertion of a section that says any county or municipal election superintendent on whom a duty to call an election is laid by an act, a local act of the General Assembly, who willfully neglects or refuses to perform his or her duty to call such an election shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. We had an instance perhaps where a municipality chose not to hold an election that was called for by an act of the General Assembly, and we had no way to hold them accountable. And then finally, again, in section 486 through 494, the last section, next to last section, section 16. It just says that no district attorney, assistant DA, attorney general, staff attorney, special assistant attorney, U.S. attorney, or staff attorney shall be accused or found liable for prosecutorial misconduct for investigating or prosecuting in good faith allegations brought under the chapter. So, in conclusion, the bill is roughly 20 pages long. It is 1/5 the size of the SB 202 legislation we adopted 2 years ago. Its intent is to clean up the language, to clarify areas that have been questioned, to ensure that all Georgia counties, 159 counties in Georgia, follow Georgia law. You'll notice that we dealt a lot with ballot security, a lot with ballot access, digital ballot access. And we dealt with challenges, voter challenges. And I would be happy to entertain questions or comments from the committee associated with SB 221. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. In the sake of time, we're gonna have to be thorough but brief. Thank you. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Chairman Burns, on the amendments, one question I had is, are you gonna have these voted on individually?
I would ask that they be taken as a package, and I've talked with Senator Robertson, and he is prepared to at the appropriate time offer the amendments.
The reason I ask, most of this is cleanup. Most of your bill is cleanup.
Yes, it is.
But there is one substantial change you're making in line 284 with an amendment, changing a shall to may.
may.
That will create inconsistencies as to how elections are done around our state. It's a policy shift. And so I just don't think that's something I'd want to support
Well,
right now. without
if
further
you like
discussion.
what we can do, Senator, I'll be happy to carve that out. I would say that Amendment 4 and Amendment 5 are in concert. We had this discussion with legal counsel and with Secretary of State. The concern they have for videos in the election office is confidentiality. I would suggest to you that if there is a Dropbox, this bill calls for a video oversight.
And that's my, make sure I'm reading it correctly. I like the video. I think having more eyes on something is a good thing for everybody involved. And so if you had the video in place, the only other thing is, I guess, with line 284, if you change that to may,
Yeah, it
obviously
does
it's gotta
give
be
them the
communicated.
option.
It's a policy decision we have to make.
Right.
Okay.
And again, I'd be happy to carve that out. If you have others, we can vote for them on them individually if that's your
All right.
preference.
Thank you.
Sir, Senator Tamala.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. To Senator Burns, the author of this bill, question on line 340. Notwithstanding any state law to the contrary, Dropbox location shall use a video recording device to monitor each secure Dropbox regardless of its location.
Right.
Such video recording device shall be placed where there's adequate lighting and where the faces of each person using the Dropbox are visible. All counties and municipalities using Dropboxes shall provide live website access to monitor such Dropbox recordings at no cost to the citizens of the county of the municipality. So this is a state requirement that we make this available, but we also have counties that don't have broadband in the state of Georgia.
Well, let
Is
me
that not true?
I thank the senator. I appreciate it, but I have to acknowledge and remind the senator that when we conducted elections in 2020, drop boxes were not inside an election office. They were not in a secure location, and yet we required video surveillance of those drop boxes. And I acknowledge the fact that that was not as consistently implemented as I would like for it to be.
Further question, Mr. Chairman. So with that video recording, I don't necessarily think that was available to the general public. Many county elections offices do have secured surveillance systems, and they would then be putting their secured surveillance feed and stream online. Are we identifying the potential security risks that their security systems may face by streaming a subset of that online? How do they differentiate that? Who's going to pay for that is my question, because I don't have a fiscal note on what that's going to cost along with the storage. And I do not see in any of the budgets, as I've said before, a line item to fund these type of measures that will be on the backs of counties in Georgia, especially those counties that are outside of the metro area. And I'm thinking about my neighbors down I-16 that I've gone to those counties that are going to have trouble with this.
Well, I appreciate the senator's concern, and I share his concern, especially when it comes to broadband access and to high-speed internet. I will suggest to you that if you have a Dropbox, you have video surveillance. Now, if the committee's will is to change how we do video surveillance, I'll be happy to entertain that.
Well, if I could interrupt, what it says is where a drop box is utilized.
That's true.
The county that does not have video streaming or Wi-Fi, then they just don't use a Dropbox.
But
Everybody's got a Dropbox at the end of the driveway anyway.
to Senator, that's very true, Senator. But to Senator Strickland's point, he's concerned about the shall and the may. And the reason to change the shall and the to may was to allow exactly what Senator Williams suggested. It would allow you to say, I'll forego the Dropbox and accept absentee ballots via mail, as you suggest, in order to not have to provide the video surveillance.
Right.
But if you have a Dropbox, the legislation requires video surveillance.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir. What number are you? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question on the last page, which is section 17.
17, oops. Section 70 now, 446 through 494, right?
490 through 494. Yes.
All right, and
Absolutely.
that's right.
Yeah, the-
Old 17, new 16, thank you.
I'm sorry. The district attorney cannot be accused or found liable for prosecutorial misconduct. Where there's a good faith allegation. So I have a couple of questions about that. Number one is you could have prosecutorial misconduct even if you are investigating a good faith allegation. The allegation could be perfectly with good faith, but you could still have prosecutorial misconduct with no issue there. I mean, without a doubt. And then secondly, the prosecutor, unless the Georgia Tort Claims Act is excluding him, which I don't think it does, he or she is already going to be protected by sovereign and qualified immunity in any event. And so we actually would be creating a whole nother immunity standard with this, because even under sovereign and qualified, you can at least bring a case. This says you can't even bring a case against the prosecutor. So it's very drastic.
I appreciate the senator's concerns, and I acknowledge the fact that not being an attorney, I've accepted this language in good faith from our counsel, legislative counsel and outside counsel. We're fortunate to have 3 attorneys on the committee, and I would ask them to share their insights and expertise. Now we have 4.
Let's see, Senator Hatchett.
Boy, I don't hear them. We got
I
no judiciary.
think based on what I'm seeing in, is it section 5 now?
Yeah.
It says section 6, lines 167 to 170. Any proceedings relating to a challenge brought against an elector under this chapter shall not be governed by chapter 11 of Title 9. That's the Georgia Civil Practice Act.
Right.
So I think they would be excluded from that based on this.
It's good. The Georgia Tort Claims Act.
Isn't that in the Georgia Civil Practice Act?
Yeah, but if they're excluded from GTCA, that means that it would come under normal qualified immunity and sovereign immunity. Because Georgia
Well,
Tort
that's
Claims
why I
Act,
wanted to
right?
Bring it up because
That's what I'm saying. That would be a huge, this is a whole nother immunity we just created. Yeah.
So what is the recommendation of the senator?
I would just,
Again, gentlemen, that's really a legal question. And I accept the advice of your counsel. I would, if I could, Mr. Chairman, could I ask Ledge Counsel, Mr. Morelli,
Sure.
to share the insights on both lines 163 through 170 and lines 490 through 494.
Yes, sir.
Maybe, I think the intent of the author, from what I'm hearing, is you don't want an attorney or a district attorney to be found liable for the, I guess, initiating an investigation based off of a good faith claim. So if we put in there, they can't be found liable for initiating an investigation or initiating the prosecution, I think that would cover what your concern is, because they could still be found liable for malicious prosecution during the prosecution. But for the first, like the initiation of it, I think is what your concern was and what you're trying to capture with your intent.
well, the concern, I guess, I see where you're going with that, but my concern would be that I think the standards of sovereign and qualified are so high in Georgia, which we use all the time as representative deputies. It's in your favor. I mean, it's in a state actor's favor. To create another standard just seems kind of, I don't know why we would do that. Takes a lot to actually find a state actor liable in Georgia. As it is.
Can I ask Mr. Morelli to speak to the issue?
His microphone's on.
I don't know if I've got much more to add to, I mean, the discussions from the members have, been accurate as far as I'm aware. The language would seem to provide a new immunity for prosecutors in this limited class of cases, whether or not it's necessary as a policy
It's
call.
unnecessary.
But the legal analysis I've been hearing is across the table is correct.
From, I would suggest to you, from an elections standpoint, this is not an area that is of focus. So I would think I would be comfortable with removing those sections if it is the will of the committee.
Mhm.
That's a lawyer question.
It's a lawyer question,
So I have a question.
Let us.
not an
finish this.
undertaker question, is it? sir?
No,
Yeah, motion.
it's in relation to the matter and issue that we're actually discussing at hand now. And so my question is, the author of the bill references working with the attorneys, and Stuart Morelli is with Legislative Counsel, and it is apparent to me that this attorney has not necessarily worked this bill. Did the author of this bill get help from somebody else to put this bill together? Because I'm just trying to
This
understand
bill is a
that.
Combination of, that, to answer the senator, this bill is a combination of multiple legislative reviews, both within Ledge Council and outside of Ledge Council. So I would suggest to you that not being an attorney, I accepted the recommendation of legal counsel, not legislative counsel, but legal counsel. Now, again, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. And if the lawyers in the room feel that it is superfluous and irrelevant, say so.
Senator Robertson.
Mr. Chairman, as a law enforcement officer, not an attorney, I want to be very clear, but sitting very close to the attorney, who I trust, I believe, the word there is, the simple part of this is I understand exactly what you're trying to do. It's just, we already have an instrument there to do that. So this is unnecessary. That's all. It's no, and listen, there are less attorneys in this building than there are everything else. So, there's no fault or foul for something like this, but at the proper time, as we move through the amended portion of the bill, I will be more than happy, Mr. Chair, to make the necessary motion to address that particular section.
Thank you.
Well, I guess that time would be now, wouldn't it?
Well,
My intention, Mr. Chair, is to do all the amendments
At
at
once,
one time, as we discussed earlier with the senator from the 17th.
right.
Yes,
but
sir.
let me suggest that that time is not yet here and it's late. And I know that. If the committee will allow, I'll assume the chair and recognize we have a number of people who wish to weigh in on this bill. And we as a committee have to decide whether, how many hours we want to spend here this evening. And whether or not we wish to be here this evening or return in the morning at 7 a.m. I think that's the fundamental question. So with the will of the committee, I'll return and try to bring some closure to our discussion. I appreciate skills and managing through the legislation. We have a large number of individuals who have a. We have 27 individuals signed up to speak to the bill physically here. We can know that 20 or so in a virtual manner. Not all of them indicated whether they were in favor of or opposed to this legislation. So what I'd like to do, thank you. Forgot about that. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, to the committee, it is my preference that we not attempt to return tomorrow, but that we work through this evening in a judicious manner. We also realize that I've got another committee meeting, and many of you have other committee meetings and other commitments. So I cannot afford to lose a quorum, because if I lose a quorum, we lose the bill and we lose the opportunity and we have to come back tomorrow. So is the consensus of the committee to work through this evening through this bill and make a decision on it, take action on it this evening? Is that acceptable? All right, then what I would like to do with our friends who have signed up, I'm going to identify 4 individuals who are here tonight. They're going to be randomly chosen, and 2 individuals who are virtually chosen. I'll accept written input from everyone, but we've got to limit it to, let's say, 6 individuals, that 4 from the room and 2 from online, and accepting again anyone who wishes to provide input to this bill. I'm going to take every 4th individual on the sign-up sheet, beginning with number 4, which would be Isabel Otero. Is Otero? If you would, please.
Yeah, I've never been chosen like that.
You get it. Please stay. You have 2 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Isabel Otero. I am the Georgia Policy Director for the SPLC Action Fund. First thing is, I don't think this version, this LC number 472325S is on the website. We would love for this to be published for transparency's sake as soon as possible.
Certainly. It was
we've-
distributed around 10:30, 11 o'clock today to everyone that was on the sign-up list.
Yep. So we've got three sections that we are most concerned about. Starting on line 25 in section 3, the program, the National Change of Address Program, used as a way to question the eligibility of a voter, as has been mentioned already. That program is not very reliable as a tool for establishing the eligibility of a voter. And there are federal laws that provide for safe harbor provisions when removing voters from the rolls using the NCOA data, because the NCOA data is known to be inaccurate. And so this includes extensive notice, for example, and that's not offered in this bill. And so we would encourage that not be used as a tool for determining the eligibility of a voter by the registrar. Similarly, in section 3, there's the use. So we've seen a lot of organized partisan groups that have been weaponizing voter challenges for partisan gain. These same groups also compile and aggregate data, and that is now eligible for use under this provision. And that causes a lot of concern for us as well. For section 5, starting on, well, now section 4, starting on line 146, it similarly uses the NCOA as a piece of evidence for challenging a voter's eligibility. And again, that is a process that has been, voter challenges have been weaponized, especially after SB 202. And we ask that at the very least, this bill be amended not to use this as sufficient evidence, but just as possible evidence, so that it's not one of the only reasons why someone could be challenged. Mass voter challenges have been a tactic to suppress political participation. And we saw that in 2022 with 92,000 people being challenged. This section, this gives
Thank
people
you.
an
Thank
additional
you for your
tool.
input.
Thank you.
Next will be Vasu Abaraban. He's good to see you again, sir. You're the lucky one, I guess. I don't know, or the unlucky one.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you.
Chair Burns, esteemed members of this committee. I'm going to make a couple of follow-on points. I mean, first of all, we'd be fine with a pure cleanup bill. There are a couple of sections here, like section 10, section 12, having to do with the absentee ballot, printed language on the applications, extending the time for people to report the denominator of the ballots. We think that makes a lot of sense. Generally, as a North Star for elections policy this go around, we believe it should, either cognizably improve the voter experience or cognizably improve the lives of local elections officials. I think there's a lot in here that makes it tougher. Local elections officials have been asking for something to be done about challenges, but not something that makes them more likely. There's one point I wanted to address. There was a difference between temporary forwarding and permanent forwarding. When it comes to Senator Mallow's brother, if he's in college for 4 years, temporary forwarding just goes for 6 months, and you can renew it once by filing another, and then it goes for 12 months, and that's it. The solution in his situation would be the permanent forwarding. It would be very difficult for his brother to be dragged in front of a county local board to answer to a hearing if that's his situation. I mean, it's a logical situation, and the exceptions don't cover his situation. Line 386 that has to do with establishing a risk limiting audit for primaries and the elections. Primaries are much more likely to have the runoffs. I hope we do something about the general election runoffs, but the primary runoffs might stay. It's very difficult within that 28-day period to run a risk limiting audit and prepare for another election. So we would recommend not going that way. In general, again, we hope that local elections officials and their thoughts here are the North Star for making these policies. There's a couple sections that are good, and many of these that make their lives harder, and we would encourage not advancing them in this session. Maybe studying them for a year, but moving this would make folks' lives more difficult. We have a new voter registration system in Georgia.
Thank you for your input. Thank you for your input. Jason Frazier, and then next up and last from the room will be Ben Eskew. So, Mr. Frazier.
Hello, my name is Jason Frazier, live in Fulton County. Just wanted to voice a couple concerns I have. I mean, for the most part, I love the bill. I think it will help out quite a bit with voter challenges. But one concern I have is the word intention or intent, which is used several places. For example, on line 76, it says if a person removes to another state with the intention of making it such person's residence. I believe the word intent and intention could be viewed very subjectively by boards of elections if there is a voter challenge. So it makes it subjective. That's my fear there. In addition to that, I did want to say that I think it's great that you are making a spot for homeless people to register to vote. I have challenged people, for example, that lived at UPS stores, and one lady came and said she was homeless, and I disenfranchised her. I don't want to disenfranchise anybody whenever I challenge a registration. However, if you're at a UPS store, you might be voting in the wrong precinct. You might be voting for the wrong mayor or city council. Some of these small races are very tight. Maybe I live in Roswell, but I work in Alpharetta. My PO box is in the wrong place. I'm voting for the wrong people. So it allows for problems to happen. Furthermore, I think we need to tighten up some of the language to help incentivize counties to actually do the work themselves on cleaning up voter rolls. For example, in Fulton County, I found 20,000 duplicate registrations. I think this should be bipartisan. I mean, one person, one vote should be the bare minimum. But I found one guy that was registered 11 times. If for no other reason, that increases cost dramatically for the counties to maintain the rolls. You have extra BMDs that we talked about, one BMD for every 250 voters. This 20,000 people here, that's a lot of extra BMDs, which makes a lot of extra precincts, which costs all of us a lot of money. So again, I'm not trying to disenfranchise anybody, but we need to do this the right way.
Thank you for your input. Mr. Frazier, thank you. Next up is Ben Eskew. I'm sorry, sir. It's you, sir, or you will pass. Quickly, please. Quickly, please. No.
I'm nervous.
Well, that's okay. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Ben Eskew. I'm so, should I go in the microphone? Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
My name is Ben Eskew. I'm so happy with bills you are working on, including unsealing the ballots for inspection and verifying ballots by text, and not just the unverifiable QR code. I am sorry to see these important issues have now been removed. I would much appreciate your consideration of fixing our unverifiable elections before I enter my precincts and vote for the very first time. I need to trust my actual vote is counted, and I would like you to add back the unsealing of the ballots and verifying ballots with the text and not a QR code. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. I'm sorry, that's out of order. Thank you. We're going to go now. Senator
Jones on number 11.
Jones.
Mr. Chair, I know we're doing it randomly, but out of the next two people, can at least one of them maybe be a Board of Elections person?
Those are going to be up
Okay.
next. We're going to do the Board of Elections. Thank you for that. I would say we're going online. I'll come back and pick up two Board of Election folks. Is that okay, Senator? I'll try to do one online. And if we got one person here, we do have one person here. We have two people here. So let's go online if we can to Miss Karen Evans. Miss Evans, are you available?
I am, Senator. Thank you.
Miss Evans, are you available?
I am. Thank you.
Do we lose our video stream? Do we lose
I'm
video
here.
stream because we're running
I'm
late?
here. I'm here.
All right, I'm sorry. Very good. Thank you. Miss Evans, can you share with us, please?
Yes, I'm Karen Evans, co-chair Macon Bibb Board of Elections. And the one thing that I wanted to expound upon, of course, is the Dropbox surveillance. And having to have those cameras, having to have the extra money to do so. We're already a small county with limited funds, and just to see who would be responsible for maintaining those, as well as I appreciate you all giving people who are homeless the opportunity to vote with an address. Can we add some language in there that includes a homeless shelter as well? Because we do have a big population here in Macon Bibb at the homeless shelter.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank
input.
you. Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. You're with board of the Bibb Board of Elections. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm the co-chair.
All right. Thank you very much. And then
Mhm.
next up online is Abiha Bhatti with the Georgia Muslim Voter Project. Are you available, sir? Are you available, sir?
I am.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I am.
Good evening. Thank you.
Dear
Please share
Chairman
your
Burns and Dear Chairman Burns and esteemed members of the committee, my name is Abiha Bhatti and I am a field organizer with the Georgia Muslim Voter Project. I'm here today to speak out against SB 221, and I urge you to reject the passage of this undemocratic bill that would lead to the disenfranchisement and intimidation of voters across the state, including the 70,000 plus registered Muslim voters residing throughout the state of Georgia. The Georgia Muslim Voter Project is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that empowers American Muslims to exercise their civic rights through voter engagement activities such as voter registration. Legislation like SB 221 would seriously undermine our efforts to register eligible voters across the state, as it would erode trust in the system and make it more difficult for us to provide voter registration services to our communities. A key concern with SB 221 is that it would require counties and municipalities to use video surveillance to monitor drop boxes and ensure the faces of each person using a Dropbox are visible on camera. This is in addition to the requirement that counties provide a live website access to the video surveillance. Both requirements are highly invasive and would lead to more harassment and intimidation of voters, especially those from systematically marginalized communities. The surveillance requirements in SB 221 could seriously damage the trust of American Muslim communities in the election system. These are communities who have a long history of being over-surveilled in our country and who are already wary of government entities. If these communities are also being watched while performing civic duties, it would only deepen their distrust of the election system's integrity. This could make them feel even less secure in exercising their right to vote, which is essential to a healthy democracy. A significant issue with SB 221 is that it would make it easier for mass voter challenges by relying solely solely on the National Change of Address database, which is often inaccurate and dated information that could be used as a basis of voter intimidation and disenfranchisement. This legislation could make it harder for people who vote by mail to have their votes counted, as it allows election officials to challenge and question voters who drop off their ballots. This is based on false claims that people are doing something wrong when they drop off their ballots, and in the past, this has led to threats against voters. SB 221 also adds additional burdens by requiring election officials to monitor voters using drop boxes to make sure only one
Senator, thank
ballot
you.
is deposited at the time.
Senator Jones, I note that if it's accurate, I have 3 Board of Election officials in the room. I have Ms. Carly Swift, Tori Silas, and Mr. Joseph Kirk. Is that correct? I'll accept input from 3 members of the Board of Elections from those 3 communities. Yeah, we'll do that. All right, would you, Ms. Swift? And then Ms. Silas? Are you with Cobb, Ms. Silas? I'm sorry. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Carly Swift, and I am a member of the Board of Voter Registration and Elections for DeKalb County. And I'm here again to express my opposition to Senate Bill 221. At the outset, I want to mention that I came prepared to speak to funding restrictions that were previously in this bill, but they've been removed. So, but the additional unfunded mandates have not. But I'd like to express my concern with the bill. Since the 2020 election, everyone involved in elections has had to deal with incessant lies related to fake voters and fraud. And even some of the members of this committee have expressed how they had to push back against those lies with their own constituents. However, instead of acknowledging those lies, this bill attempts to legislate voter intimidation and disenfranchisement. Have you guys even considered what facial recognition, biometrics, and privacy law, and how the impact of that on recording people's faces? And I'm shocked to hear that on today, this committee is okay with creating a separate but equal system that's based solely on the finances of a county, a system where counties that can afford to have technology like broadband, that can afford to have cameras, are able to have drop boxes for their constituents, but other counties can't have them. This bill completely undermines the voter challenge system by lowering the standard for mass challenges, which have been used to disenfranchise voters. In DeKalb, we received over 1,600 challenges, none of which were found to have merit. And they were all based on incomplete information from NCOA, much like today's legislation bill that I printed off at 5 o'clock this afternoon, and I arrived and found out had been changed because things on the internet just don't get updated. SB 221 does nothing to strengthen elections in Georgia. It legislates intimidation on the basis of a lie. And like my other colleagues other folks have said, this bill should be a cleanup bill, but it's not. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Tori Silas. Ms. Silas. That was DeKalb County, and this is Ms. Silas is Cobb County. Is that correct, Ms. Silas? Thank you.
My name is Tori Silas, and I'm the chair of the Cobb County Board of Elections. I've been in that position since July of 2021. So you can imagine the issues that we dealt with respect to SB 202. I commend this body for trying to fill those gaps, but the proposed legislation 221 is not really filling those gaps. I concur with the statements that have been made with respect to the biometric issues. I am a licensed attorney and have practiced privacy law for a number of years, and I respectfully would suggest to you that you've not considered the compliance with biometric logs with regard to recording and maintaining recordings of the faces of individuals, voters, should they choose to use drop absentee ballots in drop boxes. In addition to that, during the 2022 election cycle in Cobb County, we had just over 2,000 voter challenges, the basis of which was primarily NCOA information, which was found to be unreliable. In addition to that, the expansion of the types of information that can be used to substantiate a challenge, specifically lists that are pulled off of the internet with no evidentiary information or confidential, in my opinion, confidence that that information is coming from a substantiated place, I think is borderline, it's just erroneous, and it borders disenfranchisement. So I would implore and highly encourage this body to revisit the majority of 221. And I must admit, there's one specific provision that admittedly I take personal issue with, and that's proposing that a board election personnel would be found to have committed a misdemeanor in the event that they did not call for an election. I'm fairly certain that I know where that particular provision or proposed provision comes from. My county was essentially caught between our Board of Commissioners and this General Assembly, and we made a decision not to move forward with it. Again, I would encourage you that the challenges provisions are.
Thank you for your input. One additional Board of Elections official, Mr. Joseph Kirk. And then we're going to take input from the Secretary of State's office before we conclude testimony. Mr. Kirk.
Thank you very much. Bartow County. I always mention that I'm here today to speak for myself, not my county, not the associations I'm associated with. I'm here to speak in favor of this bill. There's some great stuff in here that we need. The homeless language is absolutely necessary. Changes the 1 per 250 calculation, increased audits. There's good stuff here. I'm very concerned about the video surveillance on drop boxes. So I wanted to focus on that. And first, I want to mention that absentee by mail ballots are a trustworthy way to vote, have been for years. There's checks and balances there to ensure that every ballot cast was legally requested, legally cast. And no matter if it was how it was turned in, they go through the same protections. If you're not aware, we have over 135,000 receptacles for mail, blue boxes, drop boxes around the country. It's really not that different. In fact, the only thing that's different is the case of stamp. The current rule requires at least one drop box per county. Has to be inside, has to be under constant surveillance. What we used to be a tool for the voters is become a burden on my office. We want a burden on a lot of smaller offices. You know, this is it's not often used. They turn the ballots in by hand in my office. And frankly, putting more video surveillance on them poses a safety risk. We saw this in 2020. We saw death threats from videos without context, without any kind of explanation. And I'm very concerned about putting people's faces online for people to try to confront them about their voting activities. How is that story going to end? So, you know, as I said, it's a burden to my office, not a benefit to the voters. And there's, if this is your will to do and put the surveillance on there, I ask you to let me protect my voters by not using it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. The chair will now recognize Representative Secretary of State. We appreciate the Secretary of State and their participation as we work through this legislation. Thank you.
So thank you for having me. I'll be brief as I know that we're.
Go ahead and state your name and position for the record, please.
Yes, sir. Blake Evans, State Elections Director, Secretary of State's office. I hope to kind of quickly lay out some thoughts on this bill, and hopefully my thoughts are a resource to y'all and it informs y'all as you're making your decisions on it. You do have a great resource in your vice chair up here who's had many years in elections and has a lot of great information. So there are a lot of good parts of the bill. I'll start with Section 3. I do have some concerns with that in a potential violation of the NVRA if we were to go forward with something like this, specifically the part where if a voter moves and then registers to vote, let's say in Alabama, while I agree that they have given up their residency in Georgia, we cannot take any adverse action on that voter record to cancel that voter or to require that voter reapply or re-register without that voter giving us a signature or going through the confirmation notice to be canceled. And so I would have some concerns there on that. I will say that we have a lot of great list maintenance processes that we do currently through our partnership, our membership in ERIC. We've canceled over 100,000 records when we've gotten notified that voters have moved across state lines, and we've been able to send a confirmation notice to those voters asking them to cancel their registration. So again, over 100,000 records there canceled. NCOA, I do have some concerns about the reliability of that to then be able to take adverse action or to be able to challenge a voter because of that data. I will say section 11, I think it may be section 10 now. I think it does some great things for chain of custody requirements. I really appreciate that part of the bill. I do have concerns about the live streaming of drop boxes. And I do want to clarify, it's a lengthy bill, and Senator Burns did a great job laying it out a little earlier. When it comes to line 284 and the may and the shall provision, it is not the stance of the Secretary of State's office to change that shall to a may. That's not necessarily our stance there. So I wanted to clarify that point. Section 12, I like moving the time requirement for election night data reporting from 10 to 11:59 p.m. That will be great for counties. It will help them get results in faster because they'll be able to focus on results reporting. The additional language on audits in what was section 13, now I think it's section 12. That's great. We really have been emphasizing post-election auditing. It's great for transparency. It's great for trust in elections. I like that. The part about the ballot images, we are working on a solution. We've asked for $250,000 in our budget to be able to have a solution whereby somebody from the public can go and download ballot images to be able to review those. Currently, our system puts images in 200 DPI. To be able to move to 300 DPI, there's not a jurisdiction in the country that uses our equipment and scans them at 300 DPI. So I'm not sure what the ramifications would be to move from 200 to 300. The equipment itself can do it, but I don't know. I would have to do additional research. So I wanted to give you all that information there. And then section 8, which may be section 7 now, that talks about potentially the ability for local jurisdictions to request from the state elections board to go to Haymarket paper ballots for a potential election. We've got some concerns with that. I think one of the benefits of Georgia's voting system is the uniformity of it. From an election administration perspective, I have ran a Haymarket paper system. I ran a BMD system, and a Haymarket paper system can be very, very difficult. And I have concerns about a local election officials who try to switch back and forth and the ability to be able to do that. So again, thank you so much for your time. I know it's getting late, so I won't take up any more of it, but thank you.
Thank you for your input. Chair recognizes Senator from Savannah.
Absolutely. I think we got the Secretary of State there, the election expert. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask my question to the Secretary of State's office. Just on clarifying SB 202, especially on line 298 to 301, it talks about the
221. SB.
Y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm referencing 221, but I'm also referencing 202. So 202 gives the instances of who can place a ballot in a drop box. Here on lines 298 to 301, it talks about the election official or his designee, law enforcement, licensed security guard who shall allow only one ballot at a time to be deposited in a drop box. My question for that is, as it relates to, are we going to question the voter who may have he and his wife's ballot? I mean, what's the litmus test for that? Because 202 already defines who can make the deposits of ballots for those qualified electors if they are someone. So I have a great question about that because it's not defined. It's very vague. Could you help shed some light on that? Because this may be in conflict with 202.
I think counties right now currently just the best ways to be able to make sure that the proper people are dropping off ballots in the drop boxes. I think this could actually help them provide some clarity into how to enforce that provision. So, I mean, it could be that that when somebody's dropping off the ballot at the drop box, they could be that somebody's asking the voter, hey, who are you dropping off ballots for, and that kind of thing. But I don't think that this provision here would be in conflict with anything that's in SB 202.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Columbus.
Mr. Evans, I'm sorry, something you brought up. If I live at home with my wife and my daughter and they're of voting age, aren't I allowed to carry all three of their ballots? Or my ballot, their two ballots?
Correct. Correct.
what I just heard you say, if somebody's gonna ask me, do I drop a dollar off for it?
Potentially,
Yeah,
potentially.
that's how
Take a
I
hike.
know their business, my balance, I'm pretty good shape, right?
There would not be anything to prohibit you from doing that currently.
Thank you. I appreciate Mr. Evans. I appreciate your expertise and your input. Ladies and gentlemen, we moved through this bill quickly, but it's an important bill. I'd like to remind the committee and the audience that this is not the last time we will have these discussions. If this bill were to work through the process in the Senate, it would still have to be revisited with the House. So there, any number of provisions that could change, that could find their way into a more effective form. But I would like to at least consider the amendments that have been discussed, and I would entertain motions on any amendments. Do I have to have a, no, not until after the notes. Do I need it? Let me ask Ms. Kelson. Need to, thank you. Before we begin the amendments, what is the will of the committee on Senate Bill 221 substitute? I have a motion to table. Is there a second? I have a second. All those in favor of tabling indicate with the uplifted hands. Chair counts 2. All those opposed to the motion to table, left up the hands. The chair counts 7. Thank you very much. The motion to table fails. The chair will entertain a motion on SB 221.
Motion do pass.
I have a motion to pass from Senator Williams, a second from Senator Harbin. Now, we will take up amendments to Senate Bill 221. Chair recognizes the senator from Columbus.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion, several amendments on SB 221 on line 179, immediately after superintendent. Move that we insert chief registrar on that line. On line 206, my amendment is to insert with the review and approval, let me restate that, comma, with the review and approval by the state election board, comma, after the word superintendent. On line 284, change the shall to a may. On line 340, insert where a drop box is utilized after contrary. And on line 385, remove the strike from tabulation and strike pre-certification after conduct and insert tabulation or, to be clear. So what we would do is strike pre-certification and insert tabulation or after conduct. And then strike lines 490 and 494 completely.
For clarification, strike line 490
and 494.
through 494.
Yes, sir.
So it would be striking really line 486, that whole section. Is that what you're recommending, Senator?
Yes, sir. It would be just, is that section 16?
Yes, it's
So
section.
it would be strike section 16 based on the information.
So
Senator
lines
Jones.
486 through 494. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
All right.
And that's my motion.
Is there a second? I have a second. Now, the question is it the will of the committee to take it as a package, or would you like to pull out any one recommendation? Senator recognizes Senator from the south part of Atlanta.
My
Senator
recommendation would be to not consider the changing of shall to may in this motion, in this amendment. That's the change on line 284. Consider everything else first.
Is that acceptable to the senator?
That is acceptable.
Thank you. Is the will of the committee to consider any further amendments? All right, Chair recognizes the senator from the mountains.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to amend line 36 by striking, or excuse me, 136 by striking 5 and inserting 4.
Mike, please, Mike number.
Number 5.
Fine, thank you.
On 136, it says section 5. I'd like to strike the number 5 and insert number 4.
Right.
On 163, strike 6, insert 5. On 171. I don't know if I need to enumerate these or if. you can just-
Yes, if you would enumerate them.
Okay, on line 171, strike the number 7 and replace it with the number 6. On line 196, strike the number 8 and replace it with the number 7. On line 212, strike the number 9 and replace it with the number 8. On line 220, strike the number 10 and replace it with the number 9. On line 280, strike the number 11, replace it with the number 10. On line 350, strike the number 12 and replace it with the number 11. On line 371, strike the number 13 and replace it with the number 12. On line 412, strike the number 14 and replace it with the number 13. On line 468, strike the number 15 and replace it with the number 14. And on line 480, strike the number 16 and replace it with the number 15. And on line 486, strike the number 17 and replace it with the number 16. I think I got that right.
We struck the whole section. It'd be 495, you would strike 18 and replace it with 16. Is that correct? Is that correct?
On 486, wait,
So if I understand the amendment request.
sorry, 495, you would strike 18 and replace it with number 17 since
16.
Since 17 is taken out completely.
So the amendment as made and seconded by Senator Robertson, seconded by Senator Hatchett, is to consider these amendments as a block with one exception. We would extract amendment on line 284 to change shall to may, and we will take that up separately if that's acceptable. All those in favor of the amendments as a package, as noted, indicate with the uplifted hand. Those in favor? I count 7. All those opposed? Chair counts 2. The amendments are made, and now I will entertain any motion on line 284, or you can lay it on the table. Certainly.
That may make that moot. I would propose striking lines 340 through 349. And this would leave the drop boxes as they were under Senate Bill 202 when it comes to how they are monitored. That way we don't have inconsistencies around the state based on current technologies and access to technology as to how drop boxes will be handled.
So motion is to delete essentially or strike lines 340 through 349. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I have a motion from Senator Strickland and a second by the good senator from Savannah, Senator Marlowe. Any further discussion? Those in favor of the amendment indicate with the uplifted hands. Those opposed by like sign. Counted 2, 4, and 5 against. Is that correct? Let's do that one more time. Make sure I get 3, 4, 3. Those opposed to the recommendation by Senator Strickland. Excuse me. Those in favor of the recommendation by Senator Strickland. I'll get it straight. If you're in favor of deleting lines 340 through 349, yes, sir. Certainly. That's correct. That's correct. If you. The senator knows of what he speaks. So if you vote in favor of Senator Strickland's amendment, you would eliminate video surveillance for drop boxes. Those in favor of the amendment indicate with the uplifted hands. I see 3. Is that correct? Those opposed, similar signs. I see 5. Is that correct? And no, an abstention? Abstention from Senator Williams. Thank you. Motion fails. Motion fails. On the underlying bill.
My amendment, offer an amendment that, we do away with drop boxes, period.
I have a motion to eliminate drop boxes. I have a motion to eliminate all drop boxes so that would change. Let's look at that line, folks. 284. That's right. I'm going to need legislative counsel's advice on how to word that amendment, because right now, as it stands, the code requires that the registrar or absentee ballot clerk shall establish at least one drop box as a means for absentee ballots for electors. How would we choose to implement a word Senator Williams's amendment? He has a second. So I have a motion and a second. Senator Williams made the motion. Senator Robertson made the second.
Be a motion to strike subsection C of code section 21-2-382.
So the recommendation to accomplish that is to strike lines 284 through 301. That is subsection C all the way down to 339. That's right. It would be, how about 349? There's no, I would say you would strike.
It would be striking all of the current code from subsection C of code section 21-2-382.
Excuse me. Thank you for your input. If we were to strike all code from 284 through 349, there's no need for a video if there's no drop box. Is that correct? And Ledge Council's recommendation is to, please say again, Mr. Morelli.
We strike all of the current existing code language from lines, well, replacing lines 284 through 393, all text would be stricken and replaced by reserved.
Not through 393. No. 349.
349 automatically. That hasn't been added in yet. So.
All right. So from lines 284 through lines 339 would be struck and replaced with the word reserved. Yes, sir. Certainly. All right, let me get it on. All right.
Why would you not strike the entire section, starting at line 81, 349? Is that messing something up?
If the goal is to eliminate drop boxes, this whole code section has to be stricken to reserve it. If the goal is to not address it in this bill, we can just delete all of lines 281.
So if you don't address it in the bill, then the drop boxes remain.
Yes, so the law.
Eliminate drop boxes.
Eliminate section 10, lines 280 through the end of the section, which is line 350.
Through section 10.
And replace with reserve. Please.
If the goal is to remove any reference to drop boxes in this bill, we could just delete lines 281 through 349. But if the goal is to remove drop boxes from the state code, then we're going to have to strike all of the existing code text that is on lines 284 through 339. Because we're still changing that code section. We're just changing that code section by striking text now instead of making amendments. Line 283 is what we call a catch line. That's not law. That is the references that are used to describe code language in the code. That's a drafting issue that would be updated. If this code section were removed, then Lexis, the next time they update the code, would remove those references from the catch line.
Williams was to delete drop boxes and the use of drop boxes anywhere in Georgia for election.
Is that correct, Senator?
That is correct.
And that is your understanding, Senator Robertson? Thank you.
And just as a
Just a second. I just want to make sure we understand exactly what we're doing. Mr. Morelli, we would strike lines. Please give me that one more time.
Strike all of the code text from lines 284 through 339.
All the code text from lines 284 through 339. 339, yes. Yes, if you would, please, if you're here, we're glad you're here. We appreciate you. We would request that you not engage in any outside or inside remarks at this time. And replace that with reserved. So the motion is to strike lines 284 through 339 and replace with the word reserved. The intent of that would be to eliminate drop boxes. I recognize the senator from Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify the rules of committee that every member sitting in this committee must record a vote either yes or no. Is that not correct?
I will defer to a parliamentarian. Is that correct? Correct. Thank you.
And we did have a vote, Mr. Chairman, where not every member recorded a vote on an amendment in this committee. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that if we are going to follow the rules, we need to make sure that every member who is seated in this room tonight is recording a vote and not picking and choosing which things they vote on and which things they don't.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your input. Is there further discussion on the amendment to delete lines 284 through 339 and replace with the word reserved? Seeing no further discussion, what is the will of the committee? Those in favor of the amendment indicate with the uplifted hand. I see 5. Those opposed? Chair sees 3. The amendment passes. Amendment passes. To the underlying bill. To the underlying bill. What is the will of the committee on the underlying bill? I already have a motion and a second. I'll do pass. Call for the question. Those in favor of the underlying bill, please indicate with the uplifted hand. I see 5. Chair sees 5. Those opposed? I see 3. We've been here for 3 hours. Thank you. I call the question. I did. I appreciate the senator. I appreciate his passion, and I look forward to having this discussion further as this bill moves forward. The motion carries. The motion carried on due pass Senate Bill 221 as amended, LC 472325S. Committee is adjourned. Thank you. Well, he knows how.